Hello, hello, and thanks for joining me once again in the wacky world of Synapse Analytics. Now, we did a little video a while ago about how you create serverless views. And we're using Synapse serverless pools as a great way of exposing data that's in the lake to various things like Power BI or end users, and just having a really good T-SQL way of being able to query data that's in the lake. Now, we had a bit of an issue. How do you create these views? You have to go through and create them manually? Do you have a big Sparky process that's creating a load of data, and then you have to have another separate process that's creating the views? We did a video about a quick store procedure you can build to allow you to create those views automatically. But that's a separate step. It's a separate bit of orchestration. So I'm using something like integrated pipelines or Data Factory. I'm doing all my Sparky stuff. And then I'm kicking off a separate job to kick off a store proc so that I can have these views created. So we did that. We put that video out, and then we're working with various clients, and we just built a better way. So I thought today we've got one of our principal consultants to come and show us a better way of creating serverless views that's just a little bit more Sparky. It's a bit more integrated into the way that we do data engineering, the way that we produce data. We can get Spark to push these views directly to serverless rather than having a separate disjointed thing. That's what we're going to do today. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let us know down in the comments if you've got an even better way. Can you see a way of performance tuning it? Have you got some improvements we should build into this quick demo version that we've put together? Let us know. But until then, I'm going to introduce Zach. So, Mr. Zach Stegers, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Hello, I'm good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
More than welcome. I'm going to drag you on to do lots of more interesting engineering-y, serving-y things. But yeah, do you want to take us through what you're going to go through today?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a method that we've created of defining and sending view definitions into Synapse Serverless from Databricks. So as you mentioned, you previously had a method of doing this using store procedures that were held in Synapse. This gets rid of all of that and instead has a defined set of functions in a Databricks notebook. In the demo that we're using today, we could move those into a wheel or something, and send those into Synapse to be created without any need to deploy anything into serverless or into Synapse.
Although you could also do this process we're about to run through in Synapse Spark pools if you wanted to. Just a general Sparky way of doing it. Yeah.
You could, yeah. Yeah, we're obviously Databricks fans every now and then.
Alrighty, okay, I'm going to switch over so we can see your screen. And you're going to walk through how you built this thing up. We're going to create a curated view on top of something in the lake, right?
Yes, we will, yeah. So I've just got a view over my data lake here from within Synapse, just to show there's no magic here. There's no trick up my sleeve. It is all working. So on the left-hand side, we've got our SQL databases. We're going to create one called Warehouse as part of this demo. In my lake, I've got a raw folder. It's not very organized, but I've got a raw folder with just some AdventureWorks data in it. And these are stored as Parquet files. If I hop back, I've got my warehouse folder where we're going to curate an entity, a product dimension, write it down here as Delta, and then create a new database here called Warehouse, create a view called dim product that queries the lake Delta table.
Okay, so we're tacking on right at the very end of your process, where you're taking some nice clean data, you're building out a curated object, and then you want to expose it, and we're going to do both the creating of the curated object in the lake and the building of the view.
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
Cool. So hopping over into Databricks here. So this is a demo that I've put together. It's super basic. It could definitely be improved in places, and we'll talk about that as we go. But just to right off the off, we've got an install ODBC driver. So Databricks doesn't natively include an ODBC driver, but we want to use one here to kind of manage our DDL, our data definition language statements, to send off to serverless in a little bit more of a performant way. So ODBC doesn't go down to the worker nodes within a Databricks cluster. It instead keeps things up at the driver. And can more efficiently just ping messages into serverless to create us our objects. For example, we don't need the parallelism that Databricks can offer in this case.
Yeah, we've had a few clients kind of ask us that, going, why aren't you just doing Spark dot, read.jdbc? Why aren't you using JDBC driver? And exactly, if you want to run a store proc, and PyODBC runs it on the driver, and it's just a lot more efficient, especially doing things like create views. So yeah, makes absolute sense. I think we'd normally do that inside the wheel that we're building it. I guess just for this example, you've got everything just running in a notebook, so we don't have to talk about libraries and all that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It's just easier to keep it all here in a succinct notebook so that we can run through it more efficiently. So I'm going to go ahead and run that. My cluster's already turned on. There's a little bit of setup that I've already done outside of this demo, like mounting my lake, creating a scope for my key vault, things like that. So the environment's kind of set up and ready to go. We'll just kind of step through the code, as it were, today. So there we go. I already had it installed, so it's not actually done anything, but just to keep it there as a talking point. And then moving on through to serverless serving functions, or as I've called it. We import that PyODBC because we're going to use that throughout these functions. I've defined a driver here because, again, these various functions we define all rely on that, and I just wanted to specify it once. But just to step through these functions and talk about what each of them are doing. So we've got one here initially that creates our serverless database. It's got some parameters to connect to the Synapse workspace that we want to connect to, the serverless endpoint we want to use. And one of the key things here is that we're connecting to the master database. So to create a database, it's obviously not there yet. We connect up to the master database within serverless, and then define our query just in SQL using an F string. We pass in the name of the database that we want to create. So I've made this a little idempotent by including an if not exists, create that database. So this is so that we can run it over and over again and get the same result. If the database is already there, it obviously won't do anything. And that is it.
The whole wrapper of that function is just so you can generate a string and then fire that as SQL against the serverless endpoint, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we've got an execute there. So we pass in a query parameters, which is empty. And yeah, we just generate that string, send it at serverless, and it creates the database for us.
Nice.
Yeah. But then we need to configure lake access for that database. So we don't want to use AAD pass-through necessarily. So in this instance, I'm using a managed service identity. So I've given that storage blob data contributor over my lake, so it's able to read and write data. And in this function, much the same. It's just building up a string of SQL that we then fire into the serverless database. But this time we're connecting to the database that we just created. So instead of connecting to master and having like a use statement here or something, we're connecting straight to that database, building up that string and sending it on in. Again, I've made this a little bit idempotent. We could definitely improve this, but I've just got one if not exists and then wrapped everything within it. But we create our master key, create our database scoped credential, which is just called managed identity credential. And then we create our external data source. So we give that a name that we pass in. We pass in our data lake. So we specify the path to which we want to specify access. And that's really quite a powerful piece, because if we want to segregate data by folders and only give access to certain folders to people, we can do that by changing what this path is. So for example, in this instance, we're going to just give access to the warehouse folder, and we won't be able to query outside of that using this data source.
That probably kind of looks like a lot of setup, but anytime you're using serverless views, if you wanted to use an identity other than managed, other than Active Directory pass-through, you need to do this stuff anyway. So kind of it looks like it's a large part of the script that you're doing, but it's work you have to do, and occasionally you have to do it just once, and then you create a load of views on top of that same thing. But it's normally just another bit of SQL you're going to have to write anyway, so you might as well automate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, automation. Moving on, so we produce our view definition. So again, just a couple of parameters: our view name, our data source name, and our columns. So our data source name is going to be this external data source name, which you can see we return here. So we get that back, and then we'll pass that into this function and create our view. And we specify the columns. So in this case, we have a data frame that we've read up. We've got our columns out, and then we're passing that list of columns into this view definition so that we only ever query what we've actually written down into the lake. And then we've just got to create view. So all this does is create the view definition, that returns, and then we pass that back into this create view, which again has this server, username, password, etc., the details to connect to our serverless database, which the produce view definition function doesn't have. And then we send that in and create our view.
So you can use essentially one is just a string builder that builds out that string that would create the view. So you can use that for testing. You're doing unit testing, see what the view would have been created without actually having done anything, and then you use the other one to actually just execute that.
That's right, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, makes sense.
Cool. So onto the actual execution-y part of the demo. I'll just run that to make sure our views are defined, because we'll use those in a moment. So here I've got df raw product. So I'm just going to read up a Parquet file that I've just specified the path to here. And then I'm going to create a curated product by just selecting a few columns. So we don't want everything that's in that raw file. We just want those 4 columns. And then we're going to write that down to our save location, which is specified there. So we'll write that down to warehouse. And if I hop back over to here, you'll see that warehouse is currently empty. Hop back over to Databricks. And then I will execute this script. So that might take a second. Oh, done, 3.8 seconds. So now hopping back again to our lake view, and if I refresh again, we've got dim product there. If I navigate down to that, we can see our Delta log, so we know it's a Delta table available to be used there.
I'm going to hold back how upset I am that you came from a Parquet file inside a partition directly. Fine, fine, all okay.
It's just a demo. Okay, so creating our Synapse data access and our view. So all we've done so far is specify those functions, read up a Parquet file, write it back down as Delta. So now I've got a bunch of parameters here or variables that I've assigned values to. As I said, we've got my key vault where we're going and getting our password, the thing we want to use as our master encryption key, all of that stuff. This here is quite a nice way of getting the columns out of a data frame. So we simply do our data frame.columns, that returns an array of columns. But if we do a dot join with a comma and a \n, we'll quite nicely add that comma new line to the end of every column except the last one. So that's how we cater to that. And then we're going to use that create serverless database first. So we'll create our database. Then we will configure lake access within the database, return that external data source name to our parameter, where we will pass that into produce view definition, get that view definition back, and then pass that in to the create view function. Quite tricky, a couple of steps, but I'm just going to run that all as one batch. And there's a couple of print statements in these functions that tell us what's going on. So there we go. So that took about 10 seconds. And now if I hop back into Synapse again, and I run a refresh on our SQL databases here, we've now got this warehouse database. So it's done exactly as I wanted. It's created warehouse, and it's created a view called dim product, which I can now do a select top 100 against. And that should, there we go, select our 4 columns that we defined as our list of columns back in our notebook. And that view is now available to be used by whoever has access to that.
Not at all. Essentially, there's a little bit of legwork. There's a bit of initial setup to create those functions. As soon as you've created that function and made it available to all your Spark users, they can just call that create view function at the end of any curation they've done, rather than have it as an entirely separate process to go through a list of things. It's just and now I've finished writing data, just make it available in Synapse Serverless. Very good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it also helps avoid having to deploy anything into Synapse. You can just deploy an empty workspace and then let the deployment of new or updated view objects happen at the end of any curation process.
Almost like we're working around the lack of any actual database projects for serverless databases. Weird. Interesting.
Yeah.
So on the view that's being created, anything we can do to make it better? Any tweaks and tinkering you want to do as we improve this thing?
Yeah, there is. So I haven't applied any data typing here. I think if we go into the columns, they're not looking great. There is some data typing in varchar 8000, numeric 94, so 194. So that's not bad, but we could do a lot better than that. Those are obviously quite broad data types, and that's what Synapse Serverless does. It picks the most broad data type that it can. But in terms of reading data and saving money, we want to narrow those down. So really, the product ID, for example, we could use a small int. List price, we could probably reduce the numeric size there as well. And obviously, these are not 8,000 characters. So we could reduce those down to ensure that we're not reading up as much data. And to do that, we might want to change our view definition function here to include a with clause to say this column has this data type and that kind of thing.
Yeah, makes sense. I think we could probably also do automatic wildcarding if it had the Hive syntax. If it found some partitioning, we could probably get it to build that into the view definition.
Yeah.
It's making the with statement only select a number of columns. Yeah, I mean, we could probably make it so it's actually, because we've got all the information that we need when it's in a Spark data frame, we can just make it nice and flexible. The other one, which I know, I mean, leading question, I know you got a demo for this. Loads of people try and use serverless as a logical data warehouse. So rather than just doing a straight one-for-one exposing what's actually just sitting in the lake, trying to do some stitching together, doing some curation on the fly at runtime using the view definition. How do we handle that when it's not just a straight select star, expose all the column?
Great question, Simon. So here's one I prepared earlier. So doing it that way, if you had logic and say some aggregations and some join logic or some other transformations that you wanted to do in SQL, you don't want to hold it in PySpark for whatever reason. There is another way of doing this, and you could implement a set of functions that define your view syntax. So like I've got here, in this case, I've defined a product view definition function. In this case, I'm just passing in a data source name, which goes off and gets it there, or applies it there. And it's a very similar notebook. It just, instead of having that create view definition, we pass in the entity that we're interested in the create view function. That goes off and gets the view definition. So executes again via an F string, executes our entity name view definition. Gets that query back and sends it on into Synapse again. So yeah, there's a different way you could do that if you wanted to hold all of your transformation logic in SQL.
And we can do it configuration driven. Is this a straight like for like? Do we have to go and look up a library of our view definitions and pull back the definition at runtime? And you can manage it both ways quite flexibly. Nice.
Yeah, it was pretty helpful on a recent project because we wanted to segregate data at a company level. So we had different source systems that held many different companies within those source systems, and we wanted to segregate data between those companies. And the way the client wanted to do it was to segregate data at a database level within serverless. So having this available to us to just dynamically create those databases as the data came through and was added to those source systems was really quite helpful and powerful, saving a lot of time having to manually manage all of that or define views and copy them or duplicate them, whatever. Yeah, it was really helpful.
Anything else you wanted to show us? Or is that the end of the fabulous, you wrote a better thing than I wrote?
That's the end of the demo. Yeah, hope that's been useful. Any questions or anything, please shout them out. And as I said at the top of the video, there's if anyone knows of any better ways of doing this, challenge us, send it in, let us know what you're up to.
I mean, I know there's going to be some people going, what? That's how you pip install a thing. Why didn't you use %pip? And it's because it's a quick demo and we'd normally put that in the wheel before people start writing comments. We know. But yeah, and these are all just functions that we'd wrap into our normal utility wheel, and then you can just pull them in directly. So yeah, and it's a fundamental. Are you pushing? Are you pulling? Do you want to have you're doing all your processing and you want that pushing the definitions as it finishes each thing? You want it running as a separate process that afterwards you worry about these creations and you treat it as an entirely separate thing that other people maintain and build. It's entirely up to you. It's just there's ways we can do it. We can make it more dynamic. And we can kind of just plug it directly into code if you want it to run that way, which is pretty cool. All right, thanks for joining us, Zach. I'm going to drag you back in the future to talk about more different ways of serving data out, exposing data in the lake, integrating with other bits and pieces, if that's all right.
Yeah, no worries. It's been fun. Thanks for having me.
No worries. All righty. So that is all we are talking about today. Again, switching over, you can do things the SQL way, or you can still do things the Spark way and just throw SQL over to serverless. And that's just for the view definition. Using that method, actually, because we can just call the serverless endpoint like any other SQL endpoint, and we can do it from the driver if we're doing little definition statements, or we can do it from the workers. If you want to use spark.read with the JDBC driver, we can actually just bring the two sides together a lot better. Using Spark, whether it's Databricks, whether it's Synapse Spark pools, anywhere you're using Spark, actually you can talk to servers quite nicely. So there's loads of different things we could do there. Creating views automatically is just one of them. All right, that is all I've got time for today. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll be back with more interesting Synapse videos in the future. Cheers.